Good people, today we're checking out the first, a passively cooled fanless computer case from MonsterLabo, a Belgian company with a goal to deliver a small case, powerful enough to cool good hardware, and with upgradability in mind. The case itself is the cooling with this massive heatsink for the CPU and GPU called the Heart, capable of cooling CPUs up to 100 watts and GPUs up to 120 watts in a fanless configuration, and if you add a fan, a low RPM fan for active cooling setup, the TDP rating jumps to 140 and 160 watts, meaning a 9900K system with an RTX 2060 Super should satisfy the cooling potential of the first. Now the whole point of this product is to be silent, making no airflow noise when you run this thing in passive configuration, and I thought I was being trolled by MonsterLabo when I first booted up the system because this is what I heard. But have no fear, good people, the BIOS for some reason was reset when I entered into it, so the fan went rogue and the voltage was reaching almost 1.5 volts on the 3700X, which is why the fan was ramping up trying to cool it. Not to worry, after a few tweaks though, this is the machine we were meant to hear. I locked the voltages and set the fan RPM to 500, making the system practically inaudible, not exactly passively cooled, but almost there. And there are plenty of scenarios when a totally silent machine may come in handy, like recording studios, quiet offices, and low maintenance PCs. But I will say that your ambient environment noise is actually part of the equation too. For example, when I turn on my AC, it is louder than any machine that I have in the office. When I open the window, the city noise, the wind is definitely louder than the low hum of my water-cooled machine. All this to say is that a fanless computer, like the first, has to be placed in an appropriate environment for a fanless PC to make sense. So MonsterLabo sent us a fully assembled system already, so I can work backwards to experience the first properly, and to be completely honest, this case targets a particular type of enthusiast builder because everything from the order to assembly to tweaking requires a bit more knowledge and understanding exactly what you're doing, which might be a bit of a hindrance for novice users. But anyway, in this video, let's talk about my experience with the first and how it made me appreciate the sound of silence and the sound of airflow right after this. The new Fantex P300A enclosure is a great value airflow focused frame thanks to the all new mesh front panel that is a single piece of metal for highest mesh area and durability. The inside is nice and simple, plus an exhaust fan is included. Check out the P300A down below. So the first thing we need to discuss would be the size. At 19 liters, the first is a fairly large ITX enclosure, but that is understandable as majority of it is the Heart, which is this massive heatsink, almost the size of the Corsair One system. Kind of funny to see both spectrums of high performance compact liquid cooling versus high performance passive cooling. There are 6 heat pipes on each block, and this is the biggest heatsink I've seen, which is necessary to passively dissipate all that heat, and the rest of the case frame is basically built around the cooler. It's available in black or white or anodized aluminum exterior, and this thing looks a bit like a lipstick, really minimalist, and something that would blend well in an office space or a particular type of living room. It supports SFX, SFX-L, and ATX power supplies with an optional 120 or 140 mm fan. GPUs up to 270mm are compatible with a variety of sockets too. You can see a full compatibility list on what cards and motherboards are supported, and you have to let MonsterLabo know which hardware you're going to be using inside the first, your motherboard and your GPU, so they can supply appropriate mounting brackets with the package. The I/O is up top with dual USB 3s, audio jacks, and the jankiest power button ever with a housing that isn't attached, and overall I'm a bit surprised at the feel and finish of the first. It's a bit rough around the edges, and the contrast split piece, that is the different color at the front, isn't exactly in line with other panels. In some ways it feels like a premium product, but it's almost like in the final stages of production. For example, the rubber feet at the bottom are shaped like the logo, nice touch, and a portion of the bottom frame is colored in orange after the brand colors, but then to get inside you need to remove 19 screws, and the aluminum slide from the top isn't all that smooth, and once inside you have to remove one of the support beams to gain access to the base plates, and then it's a 50-step procedure on assembling the first. A visual guide is available alongside this list of YouTube clips, so the user experience is completely different and non-traditional versus your regular case. And the biggest drawback for me with regards to the layout of the PC would be the inaccessibility of the motherboard I/O. Because it is facing down and it's actually inside the frame, it's just not easy to access. And so the workaround that they've designed is a set of pass-through cables that you install into the motherboard and route into this back plate, all of which cost extra, and once you reroute a few USB, video, and Ethernet cables for convenience, that's at least a €50 expense on top of the case price. You could bypass this altogether if you manually plug things into the motherboard and just don't access that area, because it is really difficult to get to. And I kind of understand this design decision given it's a passively cooled enclosure, therefore it is geared towards low maintenance. So maybe if you plug things in and don't replug stuff and don't access that motherboard area, but still it's not user friendly. And so the most interesting thing about the first would be its cooling potential. So let's dive into my analysis. Now, my system arrived with a 140mm fan that is, man, it is particularly loud at 1400 RPM, but it does give us really acceptable cooling during a torture test, both on the CPU and the GPU. And this would be your best cooling scenario, but totally unacceptable because of the acoustics. So I lowered the fan to 500 RPM, which makes the system inaudible. Going silent does come with extra heat, and removing the top mesh doesn't really help, but taking off the skin was a nice surprise as the temperatures dropped both on the CPU and the GPU. So for example, if I disable the fan, cooling is not an issue with the skins removed, but as soon as the case is back at its default state, the 3700X goes above 90 degrees Celsius with much higher chipset temperature too. And the thing is, this processor is rated at 65 watts, and we're struggling to keep it cool in a completely passive configuration, which gives me some concern. But installing a low RPM 140mm fan does improve our temperatures, but then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of this being a passively cooled PC case. Now, of course, this is an unrealistic load test, 100% on the CPU and 100% on the GPU. So if we just run into a game with this fanless operation, temperatures are warm, but really nothing to worry about. And I wanted to save the conversation about the price for last, because otherwise a lot of you would disappear. So the first is not a cheap item at 349 euros that you can also get without the exterior panels for 299. And there's also a B-grade option that is heavily discounted because of some minor exterior imperfections. So that's the base price. Then you have to consider getting I/O cables, the back panel, the PCI riser cable, VRM cooling and heat sinks, and there's also this top fan bracket, kind of expensive at 80 euros, but this option is needed if you're using an ATX power supply and want active cooling, making the first a really expensive computer case when you account for shipping to North America and the exchange rate, especially for Canadian dollar. And also another note, the USB 3 cables are Gen 1, so you gotta plug stuff directly into your motherboard for higher speeds. But to be fair, there isn't much competition in the passively cooled space, especially for GPU and CPU together. So like Streetcom cases are just as expensive, but don't have that much cooling potential, nor do they support the GPU. But then this case requires a fan to give you adequate cooling for, mid-range components. So unless you're in a really dusty environment, I would say going for a silent, low RPM, normal enclosure that has good airflow potential, like the Be Quiet PureBase 500DX, would give you better results in terms of cooling, compatibility for hardware, easier assembly, and it will definitely be cheaper. I do appreciate the first for trying to do something different, and especially on that whole passively cooled / active cool angle. And having that low RPM fan in there helps with cooling tremendously. However, all the add-ons are unconventional and expensive, making the first a bit difficult to recommend, especially when things like the NZXT H1 exist on the market that follow a similar structure, low footprint, towering design. But the H1 comes with a cooler, comes with a power supply, comes with riser cables, and is so much easier to work in than the first. Then there's also cases like the Shift Air from Fantex as a standalone enclosure, and the new LD03 from Silverstone that give users a bit more flexibility in terms of assembly and just are easier to work in again. I would love for MonsterLabo to improve the overall user experience with the first, because the airflow potential and cooling potential is already there, and they've designed the heart so well, but I would love for them to focus on the body next. All right, thanks for watching. Let me know if you would ever consider going for a passively cooled system and why not. I'm Dmitry, thanks so much for watching. Check out this other relevant content. Subscribe for more. I'll talk to you in the next video.